Oh, the chilling whispers of the past echoing through the mists of time. Imagine the collective gasp, the cold dread that must have gripped the very heart of the Roman Empire when news arrived, not of a defeat but of an annihilation. 3 legions, swallowed whole by the unforgiving forests of Germania, vanished as if the very earth had opened up to claim them. It was a wound that festered, a scar on the mighty eagle's pride that demanded blood for blood, vengeance for humiliation. And so Rome, with its inexhaustible might and unyielding resolve, rose again not to merely reclaim lost ground, but to quench its thirst for retribution. They marched, a formidable force, back into that same cursed, shadowed realm. But here, my friends, is where the tapestry of history begins to weave an unexpected, utterly captivating pattern. What if the very act of vengeance was destined to become a mirror, reflecting the horrors of the past? What if the fates, in their cruel jest, had decided to repeat the grand tragedy? Enter Cassina, a Roman commander with a mere 5,000 souls under his command. A speck, truly, against the monstrous tide that awaited them. They plunged into a swampy death trap, a treacherous, waterlogged abyss where the very air seemed to hum with menace. And there, awaiting them, was Arminius, the cunning fox of Germania, a master of ambush with a staggering 40,000 warriors at his beck and call. The odds, by any measure, were not merely stacked against Rome, they were an insurmountable mountain range. The heavens wept, a relentless downpour mirroring the despair that must have threatened to engulf the Roman ranks. The wooden road, a fragile lifeline across the treacherous mire, groaned and cracked under the weight of their marching feet, each step a precarious gamble against the sinking earth. And then from the shroud of the ancient trees the arrows came, a deadly hail, hissing through the sodden air, finding their marks with chilling precision. Panic, that insidious serpent, coiled and struck, its venom threatening to dissolve all discipline, all hope. Yet somehow, against every rational expectation, against the very laws of war and probability, this was not another Teutoburg. This time the story, thick with the stench of mud and fear, did not culminate in the familiar, agonizing symphony of slaughter. No, my dear listeners, what unfolded at Pontes Longi was something far grander, far more astounding. It became, against all reason and military logic, one of Rome's most audacious, most utterly insane military victories ever conceived. How, you ask? How did a force so vastly outnumbered, caught in a trap so perfectly laid, not merely survive but triumph? How did they wrench victory from the jaws of absolute despair, transforming the primal fear that threatened to consume them into an unyielding, laser-like focus? How did they forge chaos into a weapon, turning the very elements against their foes? Today, we journey back 2 millennia, not to a glorious battlefield bathed in sunlight, but to a forgotten swamp, its secrets long buried beneath layers of mud and mystery. We delve into the brilliant, almost telepathic mind games played out in the heart of that primeval wilderness. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to unravel the astonishing tale of Pontes Longi, a story that will ignite your imagination and leave you breathless, eager to discover the next shocking revelation. Imagine, if you will, the beating heart of an empire so vast, so formidable, it seemed to embrace the very limits of the known world. Rome, a name synonymous with power, discipline, and an unwavering march to dominion. Yet this titan, this colossus of the ancient age, was suddenly gripped by a paralysis, a profound and horrifying shock, all due to the loss of a mere 3 legions. It was in 9 AD, a year etched in the annals of Roman despair, that the unimaginable transpired. Deep within the forbidding emerald depths of Germania's ancient forests, where sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, 3 entire Roman legions, A staggering force of some 15,000 hardened soldiers, the very embodiment of Roman might, were not simply defeated but utterly, brutally annihilated. They were ambushed, swallowed whole by tribes that Rome, in its arrogant wisdom, had long dismissed as primitive, uncivilized barbarians. This was no ordinary military setback. This was a scar burned into the very soul of the empire, a humiliation so profound it transcended mere strategic loss. It was a wound that bled not just Roman blood, but Roman pride. And the architect of this unparalleled disaster, Arminius, the name itself a whisper of betrayal. He was no distant, unknown chieftain. He was a former ally, a man schooled in the very legions he now sought to destroy. He had walked among them, learned their rigid formations, their intricate maneuvers, their unwavering discipline. He knew their every strength, and more critically, their every hidden vulnerability. And he, with a chilling genius, turned it all against them. The massacre at Teutoburg forest sent shockwaves that reverberated across the vast expanse of the Roman psyche. In the marbled halls of Rome, senators draped themselves in mourning robes for weeks, a tangible expression of a grief that felt akin to a national death. The Emperor Augustus himself, the very architect of Rome's golden age, the man who had brought peace and unprecedented prosperity, was reportedly driven to the brink of madness, pacing his palace halls, his voice raw with anguish, screaming the desperate, haunting plea. Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions. But beyond the raw emotion, something far more insidious took root: fear. A cold, creeping dread that Rome had never truly known. The invincible empire, for the very first time, questioned its own invincibility. The consequences were immediate and profound. Rome, once relentlessly pushing its boundaries, pulled back its frontiers. Roads of conquest gave way to fortresses of defense. The insatiable drive for exploration into the untamed heart of Germania withered and died on that bloody day. The dream of Romanizing the lands beyond the Rhine, of extending the reach of Latin law and culture, was extinguished, perhaps forever. No enemy had ever exposed Rome with such brutal efficiency. Not the cunning Carthaginians who had once threatened Rome itself. Not the fierce Gauls whose warrior cries had echoed within sight of the city's walls. Not even the Parthians who had inflicted a crushing defeat at Carrhae. Teutoburg was different. It was personal. It was born of treachery. And it was, above all, unforgettable. And the man who had wrought such devastation, the mastermind behind Rome's darkest hour, he was still out there. Still a phantom in the forests, a living symbol of Roman vulnerability. This fear, this lingering, unhealed wound, would become the grim stage upon which the next great clash would be set. A clash where Rome would not merely seek to reclaim lost land, but to reclaim something far more precious, something irreplaceable: its shattered pride. The echoes of Varus, give me back my legions, would fuel a desperate, burning desire for retribution, leading them back into the heart of the beast, where another unimaginable struggle awaited. Arminius. A name that, even 2 millennia later, continues to ignite fierce debate and stir the very depths of historical emotion. To the haughty, all-conquering Romans, he was the ultimate betrayer, a viper nurtured in their own bosom, whose strike crippled their boundless ambition. Yet to the fiercely independent Germanic tribes, he was hailed as a liberator, a beacon of defiance against the relentless Roman tide, the very embodiment of their untamed spirit. But who truly was this enigmatic figure who so profoundly altered the course of history? Born into the noble lineage of the Cherusci, one of the many tribes that dotted the vast, primeval German lands, Arminius's early life took an extraordinary turn. As was the custom of the time, a practice born of both diplomacy and intimidation, he was sent to Rome as a young man, not as a captive, but as a hostage of distinction, destined to be molded by the very empire his people so often resisted. And molded he was. He immersed himself in the brutal, unforgiving discipline of Roman warfare. He learned their intricate tactics, the precision of their formations, the unwavering resolve of their legions. He mastered their language, their customs, their very way of thinking. So deep was his assimilation, so profound his understanding, that he earned their trust, and eventually the ultimate Roman accolade, citizenship. By his 20s, a testament to his innate leadership and military prowess, Arminius was not merely a Roman citizen. He was leading Roman auxiliaries, fighting alongside the very legions he would one day betray. He campaigned across Europe, battling Rome's diverse enemies, sitting at the tables of their commanders, poring over their battle plans, absorbing their every strategic nuance. He understood their formidable strengths, yes, but he also saw with a clarity few Romans possessed the fatal flaw that festered beneath their ironclad discipline, their boundless, often blind, arrogance. Yet beneath this veneer of Roman loyalty, a subterranean fire of resentment and fierce patriotism smoldered within him. He watched with growing indignation as Rome civilized his Germanic brethren, a process that entailed not just the introduction of Roman law and roads, but also the crushing burden of taxes, the ruthless burning of dissenting villages, and the heartbreaking seizure of sons as hostages. He saw the very essence of his people being chipped away, their freedom slowly suffocated by the ever-expanding reach of the Roman eagle. And so, Arminius made a monumental, fateful choice. He would not fight Rome from the outside in a predictable frontal assault that would inevitably be crushed. No, his path was far more cunning, far more devastating. He resolved to destroy it from within. The trap sprung at Teutoburg Forest was, therefore, far more than a brilliant military strategy. It was a deeply personal act of revenge, a meticulously crafted masterpiece of retribution born from a soul torn between two worlds. It was designed by a man who knew precisely when and where the Romans, in their overconfidence, would let their guard down, their vigilance dulled by the deceptive tranquility of the forest. He preyed on their trust, on their contempt for what they perceived as primitive tribes, and shattered their illusion of invincibility. But Arminius was not one to rest on his laurels, even after such a colossal triumph. While Rome reeled, licking its grievous wounds, he was relentlessly active. He worked tirelessly to unite more of the fractious Germanic tribes, forging disparate peoples into a formidable, if temporary, alliance. He sharpened their guerrilla tactics, refining their hit-and-run ambushes, transforming the very landscape into their deadliest ally. And then, with the patience of a seasoned hunter, he waited. He knew with absolute certainty that Rome would return. They always did. He wasn't merely leading warriors, he was building a movement, a surge of resistance against the relentless tide of Roman expansion. And that, more than any tactical genius, was what made him truly dangerous. He instilled a spirit of defiance, a belief that even the mighty Roman Empire could be humbled. To this very day, in the annals of German history, some revere him as their first national hero, the man who dared to defy the mightiest empire on earth and succeeded. But in the hallowed, often unforgiving, halls of Roman memory, Arminius remains a name whispered with a shudder, the nightmare they never saw coming, the internal enemy who knew their every secret. Now, as Rome, pride burning like an inferno, prepares to return to settle the score, Arminius is no longer just a rebel chieftain. He is the enigmatic, formidable figure who, in the dark embrace of the Teutoburg, taught an empire how to fear the forest itself. And as the legions march once more into Germania, a chilling question hangs in the air. Has Rome truly learned its lesson, or is it destined to once again fall prey to the cunning and spirit of this legendary liberator, or traitor? And so into the breach stepped Germanicus, young yet already bearing the weight of immense expectation, charismatic with a presence that could stir the hearts of legions, and brilliant in battle, a true son of Mars. He was no mere general. He was the heir to Rome's most complicated, most demanding legacy. A direct descendant of power, born with royal blood coursing through his veins, the adopted son of the cunning Emperor Tiberius, and perhaps more tellingly, the biological grandson of the tempestuous Mark Antony himself. Germanicus possessed a warrior's soul, honed by generations of conflict and ambition. And now, at Rome's darkest hour, the eyes of the sprawling empire, from the humblest citizen to the most powerful senator, turn to him with a singular burning mandate. Revenge. But this mission, my friends, was far more complex than simply wiping out a rebellious tribe. This was theater on a grand imperial scale, a drama playing out on political, military, and deeply personal stages. The Roman people, still haunted by the specter of Teutoburg, cried out for closure, for a restoration of faith in their invincible legions. The Roman army, its pride shattered, its spirit bruised, desperately needed redemption, a chance to cleanse the stain of humiliation with enemy blood. And Germanicus himself, standing at the precipice of his own destiny, understood that he needed not just a victory, but a legacy, a testament to his own brilliance that would eclipse the shadows of the past and secure his place in history. With the formidable, often suspicious, gaze of Emperor Tiberius fixed upon him, a gaze that perhaps secretly hoped for failure, for who could truly trust a popular, charismatic heir? Germanicus began to meticulously plan his campaign. This was not merely about reclaiming lost land. It was about erasing the very memory of Teutoburg, about cauterizing the gaping wound that Arminius had inflicted upon Rome's psyche. He was not reckless, unlike some commanders who had plunged blindly into the German forests before him. No, Germanicus was methodical, a master of strategy and foresight. His first crucial step was to deeply study his enemy. He understood that Arminius was no ordinary tribal leader, no simple barbarian to be underestimated. He recognized the profound danger of marching a disciplined Roman army into those treacherous, shadowed forests, knowing that such a move would lead to disaster again. The ghosts of Varus and his legions served as a chilling reminder. So Germanicus dared to do something different, something revolutionary in its meticulousness. He split his forces, diversifying his approach, preventing the concentration of his troops into a single, vulnerable target. He meticulously built better, more secure supply lines, understanding that an army, however brave, marched on its stomach and its logistical backbone. He ingeniously utilized the vast network of rivers for transport, transforming natural barriers into arteries of strategic advantage, circumventing the very terrain that had swallowed Roman legions whole. And most importantly, he brought with him not just soldiers, but local guides who knew the treacherous lands, brilliant engineers to overcome natural obstacles, and, in a stroke of psychological genius, dedicated teams whose sole purpose was to wage a war of minds against the Germans. But perhaps his greatest weapon, the true genius of Germanicus, was his ability to restore and ignite morale. He spoke to his troops not as a distant, aloof commander, but as one of them, a comrade in arms who understood their fears and their longing for vindication. He stood among them, recounting not just the glorious victories of Rome's past, but reminding them with a the Roman legions, those formidable engines of conquest, were a testament to discipline, ruthless efficiency, and an engineering prowess unmatched in the ancient world. But after the unmitigated horror of Teutoburg, they became something more. They were haunted. To march into the heart of Germania once more was not merely a military maneuver. It was a profound act of psychological warfare, waged not only against the elusive enemy, but perhaps more critically against themselves. These were not fresh-faced recruits blissfully unaware of the recent past. Many among them had witnessed the devastating aftermath, their friends and comrades swallowed by the forest. Some had been stationed in lonely forts on the frontier for years, their gaze fixed on the dark, brooding woods, perpetually braced for the next ambush, the next scream carried on the wind. Germanicus understood this deep-seated trauma. His mission was not merely to rebuild battalions, to fill depleted ranks. He had to rebuild belief. He had to restore the very soul of the legions. He began by meticulously restoring the ancient rituals that had always defined Roman military might. Proper formations were drilled relentlessly until they were second nature, even in the thickest fog of war. Discipline was enforced with an unyielding hand, ensuring every man knew his exact role, his precise movements, even when chaos reigned supreme. This rigorous training imbued a renewed sense of order and control, a bulwark against the terrifying unpredictability of the German wilderness. Then came the tactics, refined and sharpened by the bitter lessons of the past. No more blindly following narrow forest trails, vulnerable to ambush from every shadowed thicket. No more unguarded supply lines ripe for raiding. Every movement was calculated, every advance supported by the ingenious Roman engineers who could seemingly conjure a bridge across a raging river or erect a fortified wall overnight. The legions didn't just march. They constructed their way forward, building their dominion with every stride, pushing back the wilderness with pickaxe and shovel as much as with sword and shield. And yet, even with new armor gleaming and meticulously planned strategies, the insidious tendrils of fear remained. Would the whispering trees once again conceal death? Would the same chilling war cries reminiscent of their darkest nightmares echo through the mist? The weight of Teutoburg hung heavy in the air, a silent, unseen specter. That's when the legends began to surface, born from the very dread they sought to conquer. Stories circulated of ghosts from Teutoburg, spectral figures of fallen Romans haunting the glades. Tales were whispered of Roman shields found cracked and splintered in the mud, testaments to the brutal ferocity of the ambush. Most chillingly, there were accounts of crude wooden idols the Germans had erected deep within their sacred groves, fashioned from the very stolen Roman standards. The eagle banners, the heart and soul of the legions, now desecrated symbols of their humiliation. But Germanicus, in a stroke of profound psychological brilliance, didn't silence these unsettling stories. He embraced them. He used them. He transformed the very source of their terror into a catalyst for their resolve. He made the mission sacred, not just a punitive campaign, but a profound rite of passage. It was a chance for every man to confront the specters of the past, to reclaim not just lost territory, but lost honor. By the time the order was given for Cassina, one of Germanicus's most capable commanders, to lead his 5,000 men into the foreboding swamp of Pontes Longi, the soldiers weren't just ready for battle. They were hungry. Not for mere conquest, for gold, or even for glory. They were hungry for closure. and they would find it forged in blood and mud in the most treacherous, most unexpected place imaginable. The stage was set and the echoes of Teutoburg were about to meet their answer. It began like any other march, boots on dirt, shields gleaming, the air thick with focus. But as Cassina's 5,000 men advanced deeper into Germania, the terrain began to change. The trees closed in, the ground turned soft, and soon they weren't marching anymore, they were waiting. Pontes Longi, the long bridges. A stretch of narrow wooden roads built across miles of swamp, rotting, unstable, surrounded by fog and silence. Here visibility was a myth, one misstep and you sank waist-deep in sludge. Wagons broke apart, horses slipped. Soldiers carried each other across collapsed planks, one hand on sword, the other clinging to hope. Cassina knew this was the perfect place for an ambush, and so did Arminius. What made it worse, rain. Cold, unrelenting sheets of water that soaked armor, blurred vision, and turned the already miserable swamp into a death trap. Every tree could hide a spear. Every gust of wind could mask footsteps. And then came the first signal. A howl distant, inhuman, echoed by dozens more, Germanic war cries erupting from every side. Suddenly arrows rained down, javelins pierced the sky, and from the mist shadows charged. Chaos, but this wasn't Teutoburg. These soldiers didn't break. They reformed. They shouted Latin commands through the storm, and most of all they trusted Cassina. Even as the bridges cracked and the swamp swallowed the wounded, Cassina ordered flanks, set traps of his own, and pushed toward the only dry ground visible. Because surviving this nightmare meant one thing: reach the hill, hold the hill, and turn this boga into a fortress. The ambush had begun, but so had the fight back. Arminius didn't need numbers, he had the land, he had the fog, and he had time. While Rome relied on roads and structure, Arminius embraced chaos. At Pontes Longi he laid his masterpiece. Thousands of Germanic warriors were positioned in layers, some in trees with bows, others hiding under brush, soaked to the bone, gripping axes and spears. No battle lines, no standards, just silence until the first Roman foot hit rotten wood. Then, like a conductor raising his baton, Arminius gave the signal. The forest erupted. Javelins struck the center ranks. Mud traps collapsed bridges. Slingers targeted the engineers, and from the rear, hidden units severed supply wagons. It wasn't just a fight, it was psychological war. German warriors shouted in Latin, mocking the Romans. They wore stolen helmets draped in bloodied Roman cloaks. Some even carried captured standards upside down like trophies of mockery. And yet, through this storm of terror, Arminius never showed his face. He was the ghost in the trees. A presence felt not seen, guiding attacks, watching reactions, anticipating every Roman move. It was the perfect plan: choke them in the swamp, crush them before they reach high ground, and once again send their bones to rot beneath the mud. But what Arminius didn't account for was Cassina. Because even in the eye of the storm, Cassina wasn't breaking, he was adapting. And that single variable would turn this perfect ambush into one of the greatest tactical reversals Rome had ever seen. Mud clung to their boots. Visibility was near zero, and still Cassina held the line. While arrows rained and bridges broke, most commanders would have sounded a retreat. But Cassina knew, in a swamp, retreat meant death. So he did something few expected: he split his forces. It seemed insane, but it was genius. Using terrain like a weapon, he ordered one cohort to charge a nearby cluster of trees. Not to win, but to distract. Meanwhile, he gathered his best fighters, veterans from Teutoburg's aftermath, and pushed for the nearest elevation. A small hill rising above the swamp, hidden by reeds and fog. It wasn't much, but it was solid ground. And in a swamp, that's everything. There the Romans formed a makeshift fortress, shields locked, pikes angled. They fought like a box of iron, absorbing wave after wave of Germanic assault. Then came Cassina's twist. He unleashed his engineers not to build but to destroy. The wooden road behind them, cut, pulled apart, flooded deliberately. Now Arminius warriors couldn't rush the flanks. They had to climb, slip, and struggle just to reach the Roman wall. And from above, the Romans rained pilums with terrifying precision. Cassina even timed rotations, fresh troops taking the front while exhausted ones recovered. The Germanic advantage began to crack. They were fighting uphill in mud against an enemy who refused to panic. And as night fell with torches blazing and war drums pounding, Cassina made one final call. A sudden countercharge, short, brutal, precise. The Germans staggered, some fled. And for the first time in the battle, the forest echoed with their retreat. Cassina hadn't just survived, he had flipped the script. The ambushed had become the hunters. At dawn, the swamp was silent. Smoke curled above the reeds. The wooden causeways lay shattered, and scattered across the mud were the bodies of Arminius' best warriors. What had begun as a perfect ambush had ended in a miracle of Roman resilience. Cassina's 5,000, outnumbered nearly 8-1, had done more than just survive. They had held, they had struck back, and in doing so they shattered the myth of Germanic invincibility. The losses were real, nearly 1,000 Roman dead, many from exhaustion and drowning. But Arminius had lost far more, not just men but momentum. His aura of control, his image as an unbeatable strategist, it cracked at Pontes Longi. For the Roman troops, this wasn't just a win, it was redemption. Survivors reportedly kissed Cassina's hands. Some cried not from pain but from pride. For the first time since Teutoburg, Roman steel had stood firm in Germanic soil. Back in camp, Germanicus would later call it an act of divine discipline. Tiberius, though far away, recognized something more dangerous. A general too beloved and perhaps too powerful. But the true impact of Pontes Longi lay beyond politics. It proved that Rome had learned. That brute force could fail, but adaptation could win. That terrain was no longer Arminius' secret weapon. And above all, it showed that even when trapped in the worst conditions imaginable, a Roman legion, when led with courage and cunning, could still bend fate in its favor. For centuries, the Battle of Pontes Longi lived in whispers, a tale of heroism buried beneath mud and memory. But in the modern age, history has tools. Archaeologists began unearthing clues, first in Calchris, then in surrounding areas believed to trace the Roman advance through Germania. They found coins stamped with Germanicus' name. Fragments of weapons, collapsed wooden roads, Roman nails twisted by fire. Even bones, some still bearing the brutal marks of close-quarters combat. Yet despite the findings, one mystery remains. Where exactly was Pontes Longi? Some argue it never existed, that it was a Roman exaggeration, propaganda crafted to erase the shame of Teutoburg. Others believe the terrain has shifted so dramatically that we may never locate the true site. But what the artifacts do confirm is that Rome came back, and it came back smarter. We now know Roman engineers learned from this campaign. Future roads in frontier zones were elevated, guarded, and flanked by watchtowers. We've also discovered the scale of the Germanic coalition wasn't as unified as once believed. Some tribes may have betrayed Arminius mid-battle. Others simply fled when faced with Roman resilience. Each relic pulled from the earth adds a new layer, turning a legendary clash into a reconstructed mosaic of courage, strategy, and survival. Pontes Longi may remain elusive on the map, But in the soil, it still speaks. Pontes Longi was not Rome's biggest battle. It wasn't the bloodiest. It didn't end a war, but it changed